So that's it. 12 weeks of the cross-section. Wow.
This is The Cross Section with Nate Lull and David Edelstein.
So this is episode 12 of the cross section, which makes it 3 months, technically, if you do the 4 weeks per month. Nate, what has been your kind of top story or top conversation of that we've talked about over this time so far?
Wow. That's a good question. I mean, obviously, I think when we first started, it was all about, we were kind of getting into it at that time when they were canceling the winter championships, and there was a lot of just emotional times and talking to coaches and athletes. I know we both did that. And then it turned into spring sports and were we going to do that or not? And then it's kind of leveled off from there. And we've had a lot of questions on what the future will be. And I don't know about you, and I'm sure we'll get into this more, but it's been difficult to, there's information out there, but it's a lot of the same things. And there's no answers yet on what the future will be. And I know from my perspective, it's been really tough to continue to talk about it. I've tried to take a different approach and focus on my podcast and talking to people and interviews and trying to give people maybe a little escape from everything else, because the vibe I get from people is, when are we going to have an answer? And none of us know that. And it's been really hard to report on the same things when there really isn't an answer.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, I think, during this time is that everyone, whether you're in media covering stories or not, just talking about it with fans and family, is we've got this one story, which is the coronavirus and its impact, and all these different angles that are part of that. And so continually every day, figuring out the information, finding out how people are communicating, how they're not communicating, when things will happen, when things won't happen. There's a lot that is known, but there's a lot that's unknown. And kind of the known parts are more about how, well, we know what we don't know, which is a good start, because then we know what we have to figure out. And for me, I think one of the things that we've talked about that's been really insightful has been, besides the typical everyday reporting of here's what happened, here's what this person said, which is what I usually do on a daily basis, and I'm sure what you do also at the radio station, with letting people know the news and the events and the things people are saying that they need to know that impact them. But what's been insightful to me through the cross-section over the past 3 months has been being able to sit down with different people, and also just you and I, discussing the possibilities and taking what people have said and maybe giving not our opinions on it, but just more of an integral analysis, putting the pieces together and connecting the dots to see, okay, if this person said this and this happened the other day, what are the chances this really happens? Or what are the thoughts that people could be having? And asking those questions also, because we're not, at the moment, professional athletes, we're not coaches, or maybe you've coached a few leagues, you said, but I definitely haven't. But we get those coaches on here and see what their perspective is on, hey, are we down the right path? Are we connecting the dots in the right way? And hearing what they're saying the process is going to be. And I mean, that leads perfectly into the New York State Public High School Athletic Association COVID-19 Task Force meeting that happened this week. On June 30th, Tuesday, they had their second meeting of the COVID-19 Task Force. And I feel like a lot came out of that. Like, we were talking for 40, 50 minutes about all these different things that happened and all the different aspects that, I mean, were just so many. But I feel like a lot totally did not come out of that either, from what we're all expecting.
There's just so many what ifs and options. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, they came up with 6 different options that could happen for next year. And it was, I give that group a lot of credit, because they're going through and they're trying to figure out a way to make it happen, which is the most important thing. They don't want to have what happened in the spring. If they can avoid that and keep everyone safe, they want to find some sort of way to have some sort of fall sport. But at the same time, when you read through it, it's such a broad thing still. It's like, well, yeah, here's some answers, but they're not really answers, and we're not really going to know until at least the end of July, maybe even August. I could see them pushing it back again. So it's frustrating because you want an answer now, but it's also impossible for them to give you an answer. So that has been the most frustrating thing, I think, for me and for the athletes that I cover is you have kids who are juniors who are now going to be seniors, and they've already seen what happened last year, and they're really fearful that that will happen to them for their senior year.
Yeah, if anything, throughout this whole process, I've learned how to meditate a little bit and just kind of sit there like,
Right.
no, just wait. So, I mean, it's not like nothing, it's not that nothing came out of that meeting. There was some valuable information that came out. I'm making reference to the fact that there are so many questions people have that were asked about details. And when there are so many questions, but you really only have the one answer at the moment because it's contingent upon other things, that's when it seems like it's like, wow, like it's moving slow. But they have an almost impossible job because here's what did come out of the meeting is that they considered these 6 scenarios. And Rob Zayas, the executive director of the state association, said there could be 12, there could be more than that, but here's 6. And they were different variations of school comes back in full, in part, virtually, and in any of those situations, athletics comes back, athletics doesn't come back, athletics comes back in part, or the seasons are changed in dramatic ways. And it's interesting because what was really being said, the overall thing was, we have to plan for all these different scenarios. Here are the scenarios we considered, the 6 of the main ones right now, is what they were saying. And they're like, what they're really saying is we have to plan for these scenarios because we can't make any decisions right now. We're not able to. We said we weren't. We're still not able to. What we need to make decisions is guidance combined from the governor's office, the state education department, and they're expecting that one on July 13th, the state health department, and then the state association itself. So they need all of those guidance or organizations to give guidance at the same time in a collective manner. I haven't seen them all necessarily even give reports to the committee at the same time. Yeah. So they need all of those, the governor's office, the state education department, and health department, to give them the guidance at the same time so that then they know, okay, here are the rules. And now let's make a decision. So what they're doing now, while they're saying we just literally don't have the guidance. That's what Rob Zayas keeps saying. We need patience. We don't have the guidance. And that we all have to understand that. There are a lot of moving pieces. And like he said, the state is handling a lot of other things too right now. So when you're expecting the guidance from the state education department to come on the 13th of July, I asked the question, how long do you realistically expect that it will take to get ready? When is the deadline for figuring this out? And he said, I expect that mid-July we're going to have the state education department, and that means late July, early August we can make a decision. And some people on Twitter were responding, some coaches, some superintendents actually were saying to my tweet about that fact when I asked them that, not a lot of time when August 24th is the start date for fall sports.
One thing that I wanted to bring up and ask you this week is my boss had asked me, okay, this stuff all came out and they really did lay out some different scenarios of, okay, if this happens, we could play these sports from here to here, these sports from here to here, and on down the line. So that model could look a lot different than our normal model of covering sports. So his question to me was, okay, so, say in some of these models, they have reduced amount of times and maybe they reduce travel. We've seen that in some of the college leagues. They're trying to reduce traveling all over, playing some teams in your more in your local area. What do we do as media members when we're out on the front lines all the time? And I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm a doctor or a nurse. Like, those are the people on the front lines, but what will we do? Are we supposed to still travel all over the place? What will our coverage look like? And that just threw a whole nother curveball at me.
Yeah. Well, first to just finish that, to clarify, to finish that, the other thought too, which is that the state association has these scenarios so that they can be ready when they get all that guidance to jump in, and that they won't have to then start planning, which would delay the seasons more. Because the impact is if you don't start planning and then you get the guidance late, then you take even longer. But if you start planning now for all these random scenarios, not random, but thought out scenarios, And then you have plans for each of them. Once one becomes the real one, you can start acting rather than start planning at that point.
Right.
Zaya said that football and fall sports schools would need 5 to 6 weeks to really get ready for the season.
Right.
They're going to have maybe 3 if they make the decision in early August or less. So that almost guarantees that the fall season is going to be delayed in some way for them to figure all this out. And, even issues like testing and issues like transportation and all these other questions and scheduling that people were asking, every time the answer was, we just need guidance. We need the guidance. We got to be patient. We need guidance. That's going to be the schools. That's going to be later, because we want the answers now. But right now, the whole idea was get the 6 scenarios down and then be ready to jump in when we have them. So that's why I think what they did is proper, even though it seems like, man, we have so many questions. So why does nothing happen? But really, they're preparing for the moment to strike when it happens.
Sure.
So I think that's the important part of what came out of the meeting. When I'm thinking about sports coming back, to answer your question, how do we plan? What are our 6 scenarios about what's going to happen? Because the seasons are potentially going to be changed too. We can't plan until we know the schedules. And in all honesty, we don't really know the schedules until they start playing these games. Until they show up and they're at the game, then we'll say that we know what's going on as far as which teams are going to play on which days. Even with Major League Baseball, they say they're going to start 23rd or 24th of July, and they're back to spring training. Okay. Until they play a game, are we sure about that? The NHL has a whole plan. They've had it longest of any sport, I think. Until they play a game, are we sure they're going to finish that season? Until they get this down, are we sure that the high school sport's going to happen? And it was interesting to see, all of a sudden we had Matt Hazard on our as our first guest, or one of our first guests rather, early on here. And we talked about the flipping of the seasons. And so he was talking about maybe we flipped the seasons, and we were seeing how realistic that was. And when we talked to Zayas originally about it, he said, nah, it's on the table because everything's on the table, but not really in consideration. And then today, this week, all of a sudden we get the list, and it says, well, here are 6 different ways that the sports seasons might be flipped or shortened or moved. And we were like, it's on the table now. And so it's interesting. Scenario too, because not only the ones we predicted, but the ones that new ones too that I didn't see coming. So I think that it really depends on. We're also in a waiting pattern, as everyone keeps saying, because how do we plan before we even know what's going to happen? And
sure.
We'll social distance, we'll stay away. I think our job becomes that much more important if you can only have no fans or only 2 fans per participant there, and hopefully they're following the rules, because the kids are telling me, the students, that they want everyone to follow the rules so they don't get shut down. So multi-part answer here, but we also are in a kind of, okay, let's wait and see and then plan based on what happens. But of course, we have to make sure we practice social distancing. We have Zoom lenses on cameras, so I could stay far away from anyone.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I know for you and definitely for me, if I go from one end of my coverage area to the other, I could go 1 hour in one direction one day, and then tomorrow I'd be going 1 hour in the other direction, depending on who's playing. So it's like, in terms of social distancing, yeah, I can go to a game and I can stand over here and be careful, but you're still like putting yourself in those situations and like, what's the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to do? Like, I'm still coming home to my family after I've traveled all over the 3 counties. Like, is that acceptable? Is it not acceptable? Is it irresponsible? Like, yeah, I guess I can go to a game and wear a mask and stand far away, but I'm still going to have some interactions with people, and I'll be traveling. And this week it was something we talked about at work, and I was like, I really hadn't thought about that. Normally I'm all over the place and wearing myself out and late nights, and now we don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know. I feel safe. I'll feel safe going to games. I'm still going to do it, but like, what's the responsible thing for people that are going to come into contact with me? Because you never know what's going to happen out there. I don't know. How do I get an interview without necessarily, you've been doing it. Yes, I've been doing it, but you just got to be extra careful, I guess.
Yeah. So before I comment, and I'm still processing here. What have you thought of over the few days that you've been thinking about this? What kind of conclusions have you come to so far?
I mean, we just talked about at work, like we think it's very important because of the fact that maybe parents, grandparents, and regular fans might not get to go to these games. So it's extra important for us to be there for the coverage, whether it's radio, whether it's social media, etc. If we took the proper guidelines and protocols, and we don't think it would be a problem, but at the same time, you are still putting yourself at risk by going out there. And I know for us, we're a small station. We have 3, maybe 4 people in the office. If one of us did get sick, then the whole station could be in real trouble of not having people in the office to run the station and keep it on the air. So being very careful about where we're going and what we're doing, social distancing, wearing our masks, all those things. But it was one of those things we really didn't have a complete answer, but we felt like it was something that when the day comes, we need to do it, so that we make sure we get information and scores and everything to our listeners.
Yeah, it's that balance between we are the eyes and ears of people who can't be there, and literally people are not allowed to be there right now. And if they are, it's only very select people.
Sure.
So we almost have, we're essential workers. They consider us, right? And we've been working this whole time. I've been going into the television station, and we've been very strict about social distancing and mask wearing guidelines. And I mean, putting plexiglass up between desks, spreading us out around the building, not being near each other, not going into offices. We sanitize our microphones and equipment if we're going out. And like you said, we have, some of us have been going out. I've done some interviews in person. Because we also have to be out to see things. I've been sitting at my desk a lot and doing video interviews. If I'm not leaving, we can't accurately figure out the things that are still going on in the community. But the precautions we're taking within the guidelines and everything that we're being told, plus our additional strict rules at the station, include, we're sanitizing every equipment that might get passed between someone before and after. It's a wireless microphone, so I sanitize that, I give it to you, and I'm standing far back, and I've got, like I said, a zoom lens camera. So for me, I can just zoom in on them, wireless microphone, not near them. When I take back the microphone, immediately it's sanitized again. I'm wearing, I can wear gloves. So we're doing it in that kind of safe manner to prevent anything. But you think, so, this Monday, there are actually going to be softball and baseball games on July 6th, because that's the day where all sports can resume some sort of activity, and baseball and softball specifically are a moderate risk sport that will now be allowed to do all things that they want, as long as they don't go over 25 people together, right? And they follow the guidelines, social distancing, and it's not travel between regions. So within the Mohawk Valley, they can have these tournaments, and not like they're leagues, organized leagues, little leagues, high school, collegiate. And so what's going to be interesting is I had the question asked to me, what happens when I go to this game on Monday? Yes, I'll be wearing a mask if I'm near anyone. But if I'm in the outfield and I'm 20 feet or more, far back away from the closest outfielder and another person, and I'm going to go live on TV, do I wear my mask there? Do you wear your mask as an example on TV to show people that I'm wearing my mask anyway? Or do you say, I'm literally not near anyone? You can tell that from the camera. So I'm not going to wear my mask and out in the back there. But it definitely is a question about how do you balance still bringing the coverage, but realizing you still got to be there. And I've been saying it the whole time, like, of anyone, like I haven't seen like my family or things like that. I haven't traveled to other places because I know that I am probably one of the higher risk people to, if I do have it, thank goodness I haven't felt anything, but I tested negative the one time. But it's like, if we're still moving around and interacting with people more than anyone else, we also have to make sure we limit our interactions with people and do them safely. So, I mean, what are you thinking as far as like, for radio, right? For me, for television, I mentioned that it's easy for me to stand far away as long as I just hand someone the microphone and get away quick because I can just zoom in. Fine, camera, awesome. But for you, I imagine for radio, I mean, you're either holding out a microphone to someone, you've got to be closer. Maybe you have a wireless thing that connects to like a recorder. Like how does this work for you? What are your thoughts of doing it radio wise?
Yeah, I mean, everything that I traditionally use is wired. So we would have to either look at hooking up one of our wireless units to do it, or just saying like, hey, we're not going to have like, hey, we're doing a football game. Normally we would have like coach on after, or player of the game or something like that. Maybe we're not going to do that right now, just in the effort of safety. Maybe we do more pre-recorded interviews before the game where we can do it over a Zoom, or do it over the phone or something like that. But I have had podcast guests that have come in since this, and we've done a live in-studio interview, and we taped it off to make sure we were far enough apart, sanitized everything. And I only did that with guests that were comfortable with it, wanted to do it. But that's been interesting, bringing people into the station, into the studio to do things. We had a lot of long conversations about that before we did it. So it's kind of been crazy. But again, we haven't had to deal with that in-person scenario yet. So I could see us doing games, maybe cutting down on the amount of interviews that we do live, like in person. But, it has worked with the podcast so far, and I'm hopeful that if we set up far enough away from everybody, it can work. My fear would be, as you probably know, in some of these school press boxes, I mean, traditionally I would walk in and do my radio broadcast in the press box, and I'll be standing right next to my color guy, the offensive coordinator, the other team's offensive coordinator, the guy who's doing the PA, the guy who's doing the scoreboard. I mean, you got like 8 people crammed into this little press box. How does that work? No idea.
And that'll be interesting for the fall sports too, that use, first of all, we have to still wait for schools to have their facilities be allowed, right? Because we got new guidance from governor's office saying, even though we're in phase 4, schools are not allowed to continue, not allowed to have people on their fields for organized high school leagues and things like that. So we're still even away from that guidance being allowed. So let alone figuring out what scenarios to jump in on. We're still waiting for the governor's office to say you actually can go, because that was delayed. So people couldn't even start practicing. And that's been a big thing of some coaches being a little upset that changed last minute. But obviously I'm hoping that people know the safety guidelines better than I do, and they're figuring it out, and their guidelines are going to keep us all safe. But it is interesting to see that the softball and baseball are coming back on Monday. So we've got basically an unofficial Legion league for District 5 up here, Oneida County, Herkimer County kind of teams. And they're going to be playing at DeLutis Field in Rome. And it's not Legion because Legion canceled, but they made their unofficial league. It's their own league. They got their own, each team has their own insurance kind of thing. They're signing it. Everyone has to sign a waiver, pandemic waiver, saying, basically, I think you can't be sued. You can't sue the field for allowing, if you get sick there because you're using it, because there's no such thing as pandemic insurance. I did a whole story on that, and it was like, pandemic insurance, no such thing.
Right.
And also there's going to be the Empire Collegiate League, which is based out of Syracuse, but players from all around the area are going to be playing at DeLutis Field. And then we've got a softball league in Ilion that includes Cooperstown, includes, I believe, CVA, Herkimer, New Hartford, all these different schools, but they're not affiliated with the schools. It's their own independent league. And the cool thing is, besides the fact that they're coming back and we're going to figure out, I will be at those games wearing my mask, doing what I need to do to explain that this is happening and be the eyes and ears for those who can't be there. But along with that, it's going to be interesting to be there because the high school seniors, some teams on an individual basis are allowed to decide if they will allow their high school seniors who didn't get to play this year to play on the team. Usually the league, including especially the Ilion one, the softball league, was specifically pointed out as a league that was created originally to kind of be an unofficial look at the softball teams for next season. So it would be in the summer, and you'd start seeing where everyone is so you can then prepare through the winter before next spring. Allowing seniors back obviously changes that dynamic, but it gives the players, the student athletes, the opportunity to play. And after all these months of doing stories of how upsetting it is to not have the season, suddenly there's a moment here where we might be able to see some of these seniors actually get a chance to play with their high school friends one last time.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. I know there's a softball league in Binghamton that is not starting quite yet, but they were hammering out some of those details as well on if they would let seniors play or not. And very similar on the AAU basketball circuit. In fact, I got to go to an outdoor private AAU basketball practice this last week. It was just great to see the players getting out there and how hard they were working and how excited they were. And a lot of teams in New York are planning to go to tournaments in July in Pennsylvania. There's a big facility called Spooky Nook down in Pennsylvania, and they're having big-time tournaments. Now, will that continue to happen? Because I know Pennsylvania's been having a little bit of a spike. I'll be interested to see. One of those tournaments is next weekend. So I'll be very interested to see if our local teams get the opportunity to play. But a couple of them have been doing outdoor private practices. So it was neat to go watch and see. But again, that was one of those things where, do I go? Do I not go? What's up with social distancing? They took it very, very seriously. And I was very interested to see how they would do that. But at the same time, they were like, hey, we're trying to give the kids any opportunity we can to stay active, stay fit, stay healthy.
Yeah, it is interesting because I know that no sport right now is allowed to do what they're considered travel tournaments, tournaments that include travel. And I have heard that some teams have played games in Pennsylvania and traveled back, or even between regions in New York. And at least my interpretation, and this is where the interpretations of the guidelines comes into play, from what I've been hearing from different mayors and county executives, and what my interpretation of the rules is, the guidelines, is that you can't travel to do that, that you can't actually go to Pennsylvania from New York and play a game. That I don't even know, you're in Shenango, Otsego, and Delaware counties, if Otsego County is allowed to go to either of the other two, because that's not the Mohawk Valley anymore.
Right.
So it's interesting to have it.
Yeah, huge gray area.
We had Jason Miller and Mike Gentile on, the Little League district administrators, on a few weeks back. And I remember Jason saying specifically that, hey, the guidelines are a little gray, but we're trying to figure it out the best we can. But if we misinterpret it because it's vague in that way, and our interpretation was different from what they actually meant, if I want to get in trouble, okay, fine, then I get in trouble, I guess, but I'm going to give them the opportunity. Right. And it seems like, I don't know what the implications will be. I don't know what will happen. And obviously you don't want anyone getting in trouble. It seems everyone is trying to follow the guidelines to the best of their ability, but because there's so many moving parts and so much guidance at once, and trying to understand what this guidance means, it does seem that there have been some things that have started, such as, remember the teams playing in the parks when the phase 3 first started and parks were open. Teams were meeting in the parks up to 25 people. And everyone was like, no, you're not allowed to do that because it's organized sport. But everyone was like, yes, you can do that because it's a park and it's less than 25 people. So
very gray area. And I know from just looking at the AAU schedule, there are tournaments scheduled in New York State in July and August. I actually reached out to one of the tournament organizers who was running a tournament in Albany. And I said, so if someone was like, would you suggest to a team right now that they can sign up for a tournament at the end of July? And he goes, we're planning on having the tournament and we're going to follow all social distancing guidelines, and I'll have more information as we get closer. And I'm thinking, that's in Albany. It doesn't get any closer to the New York State government than that. So that's where I'm like, there is so much gray area right here, because like you said, one thing you read, it says no, no, no. And then over here, it's like, well, yes, if you do this, this, and this. So it's been crazy to kind of watch that.
And, it's interesting because the whole thing that's this pandemic has caused is everyone to try and either have their own opinion or their own interpretation, or everyone's trying to figure it out. Yeah, I doubt that there's anyone who's actively saying, let's just do things, and if people die, people die. Like, that's really hard. And if someone is, I can't understand that. But what I do understand is that while people are saying, what is in the best interest here and how do we mitigate both sides, right? You have the open the economy versus and it doesn't, it doesn't seem like the virus has really been bad in this area, so we can open the economy. But then you have the other people on the other side who are like, well, it hasn't been bad in this area because the economy's been closed. Then there are people, even the debates about wearing a mask or not, am I near people? Am I not near people? When should I wear it? When shouldn't I wear it? But what's going on in sports is this, okay, how do we come back and give people the opportunity while at the same time trying to figure out how do we stay safe and do it? And it's basically like, if we don't want, we know for a fact, if you want no risk, just don't do anything.
Right.
Anything we do, the second you go near another person, there's risk. And I mean, with any virus and anything there is, the difference here, notably, this is a pandemic where we don't have a vaccine yet, we don't have a cure, we don't have a prevention, and it's killing people at high rates. So that's why this is so dangerous. And so if you do anything, you go food shopping, there's risk. You have an interview in person, there is risk involved. But how do you mitigate the risk? You explained that you were sanitizing everything. I'm sanitizing the microphones, staying far away from each other, taking the guidance that we know. I'm not a health expert or scientist. I don't know how the virus really works. I only know because people are telling me, and it's my job to try and understand it from a bunch of people and explain it in simpler terms to others so that they can understand it. That's my full-time job. And so trying to understand these guidelines is still difficult, even though I'm spending all day talking to everyone and trying to figure out, if we're going to have sports, what are the benefits? There's moral theory involved here. I don't want to get too deep in philosophy. I do enjoy philosophy and deep discussions, but there are discussions about moral theory here. Utilitarianism, for example. If anyone's interested, feel free to reach out. We'll talk more about moral theory and ethics, but utilitarianism says, that's a moral theory that people follow, saying what brings the most good to the most people. And if they value the benefits of having youth sport and high school sports and getting people on the field and getting back into it and education in that way, not more than, but if they think that there's a great value, however you quantify that. P.S. That's one of the problems with utilitarianism. You can't really quantify any of it, but you're just guessing. But if you value that and you say there's a lot of value there, there's a lot of good for a lot of people there if we get back on the field, and the risk, we can mitigate that, and maybe the risks, the negatives are a little bit lower. If you judge it that way, then it's worth going back out there. But there is still the risk no matter what. For the people who might value, we can't have any risk, you're going to lean toward coming back inside and not having these leagues and not going through the process of trying to figure out the testing and funding and what's going to happen. So there's all of this at play, and everyone's trying to figure out with their differences, where is the benefit? Where is the line where we say, yeah, there's risk, but we can mitigate that risk, and we have these extra exponential values that come out of it by coming back. And that's been an interesting discussion, whatever form it's taken, monetary discussion, high school seniors getting back on the field, playing, the value of youth sports, youth development, or the health side of it, and the broader structure of the country. It's been very interesting to see how this is all intertwined when we're talking about a baseball game.
Yeah, that was the vibe I got from talking to some of these coaches and tournament organizers, and their words to me were, if we can mitigate the risk, we think it's good for the kids to be physically active. Mentally, they need it. They're just dying to get out there to do something and to be with their friends, and just to have that release, I guess, of playing sports and getting that energy out a little bit. So that was kind of the vibe I got, is that was a big reason, like, hey, if we can downgrade the risk as much as we can and still get out there and play, then that's what we're going to do. But again, like you said, it's a risk. You can't be 100% certain on any of that stuff.
And so, having covered news and also just simply following what's been going on, as really anyone should, I have noticed the discussion of, let's get back to, why did we start all these quarantines, and why did we, have this isolation? Why did everything shut down, right? Why did we not play, even though there's this virus? There's a flu season every year, and the strains are different every year. Right? There are multiple strains throughout one season, but we still play football, we still play stuff. So why did we do this? One, obviously, the virus is new. We don't have a cure for it, and it's killing people at high rates. We don't understand it, so we needed to slow it. But one of the big things that the government continued to say was, we're doing this to slow the spread, flatten the curve, have less people in hospitals at a time so we don't overwhelm the hospital system. So in a way, you can think that that kind of implies that we know people are going to get sick from this. We know people might die from this because we're trying to figure this out. It's unfortunate. So how do you, so the goal is don't overwhelm the health system. Let's save as many people as we can in the meantime while we're trying to develop a vaccine for this. And that way you could just, you get a shot, right? Done. Or whichever form it comes in, I guess. Again, not medical expert. But so if you're getting to a point where, the risk is still going to be there. We're still have to wait another year for a vaccine from what they're reporting, right? They're still testing it. There's 6 in active production from what I've heard on NPR report, that they already, what we're doing differently this pandemic than 1918's pandemic is we found 6 different vaccines that might work, and they've already started mass producing them. Because if they find out that one works after their year-long study, they don't want, like same thing with the New York State Public High School Athletic Association. They don't want to start planning to make them next year. They want to have them already ready to go when they find out it works. So, and that's also a moral theory, literal costs of figuring out whether it's worth doing something or not, or the costs, not monetary, but costs of not doing that. How many more people are going to die if you only start making them when you find out it works down the line, or if, have it ready. So there's a balance of trying to figure out, okay, so how do we have it under control? And it's a constant conversation. Every day we hear, do the states have it under control? Does New York have it under control? Do the regions have it under control? Is phase 4 and phase 3 reopening? Are we seeing that it's not working now as cases have doubled? Are young people now getting it because they don't think that they're in trouble, but now they're getting it and spreading it, and because they're going out to restaurants? So they've been talking about taking back the alcohol. All of this impacts sports, right? Who would have thought? But this understanding of how overwhelmed will the hospital system be? If that was one of, if not the main reason for isolating and shutting everything down, to not overwhelm the health system, so that way we can save as many people as possible in the meantime by having enough hospital beds to save them. Are we now at a point where the hospital systems are not overwhelmed? And so that if we do go back to things that are more risk, which means that maybe there will be more virus spread, that we can handle saving those people. And I don't think anyone's really discussed that yet, but I think that that's really the basis of all of the discussion right now, is figuring out, why did we do that? What will the impact be? When you increase risk, you increase cases. Does that mean that the health system will be overwhelmed? Can we handle this? I think has been the question the whole time. I don't have the answer, but the health professionals do. And I think that's really the major point that needs to be taken into concern, along with everyone's individual considerations of who am I around? Who's my family? We hear Mike Trout talking about this. We don't know if he's going to play yet this season for the Los Angeles Angels. He has, young kids, I believe a new kid that's going to be welcomed into the world at some point during the season, right? Ryan Zimmerman from the National Society is not playing this year because he's like, I think he's the one with the new kid that will be welcome this year. You got to figure out your own personal risk too. And I think those are the major things that actually go into play here when discussing, do we have sports, and how do we have sports, and how do we cover them?
Yeah, as we've talked about before, I think the pro and the college model will somehow trickle down to affect the high school model in some way, shape, or form. So a long road ahead still, I'm sure.
Well, what do you think? So you've got SUNY Oneonta, you've got Hartwick down that way in Otsego County, D3 school and SUNY school, right? So we've seen these D3 schools canceling their sports, not like crazy, but I mean, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of, when you think about it, they're still waiting for the NCAA guidance in their way. Hamilton College up here is still no changes, but you saw Bedouin College canceled fall sports. We saw Williams College canceled fall sports. And it was also directly told to me in conversation that a third Division III NESCAC school was going to cancel their fall sports effectively by not allowing their teams to go off campus and play and not allowing other teams to come on campus to play. So that still leaves, you could look at it two ways. It leaves 8 of 11 NESCAC schools. Hartwick's not in the NESCAC, but it's a D3 school. 8 of 11 still there. Or you could think 3 just canceled. What does that mean? And I'm being told in my reporting that it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get here is they're taking it week by week, day by day, constantly talking to their conferences that they're in, the Empire 8 and the SUNYAC, seeing what other schools are doing. I've been very curious to see if it will be a domino effect with some of those other schools canceling, like when one falls, will the rest. So far, I think they're trying to hold out, at least in our local area, for as long as they can. But I really don't know. I think that the vibe I get from both of the schools here in Oneonta are that they'll try to move forward in as normal of a fashion as they can, but they're also waiting to see what the league hands down. And they know that if that call comes, then things could get canceled, even pretty close to the regular fall season.
I did some reporting with Utica College and Hartwick and Hamilton and all of those around the area here a few weeks ago, and they all the coaches were kind of in consensus that fall sports will be delayed in some way at this level.
Right.
And it might even be drastically different, because remember, Utica College football head coach Blaise Fagiano told me that he's talking with other schools right now, other colleges, about whether if they can't play, if other schools cancel like they are now, maybe we have some more New York centric teams that we can just play within the region and still do something, maybe because we're in the region, which seems to fit more into the New York State guidelines for what sports can happen, which is not traveling outside the region. So as much as we're getting close and those deadlines are coming, the decisions are also still in the process of being made, and we're still very much in that planning process. But I will say, as long as nothing changes last minute on this Monday and the July 6th, it will be very good to see some live sports and to see people get back out there in a safe way.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to watching whatever story or interviews you do on that. I think that's going to be a fun day.
Tune in to WUTR at 6 p.m. I will be live from Duluth Field. Again, as right now, I would change last minute because things have changed last minute recently, but that's the plan. And I'll be at the baseball games there. We'll also have some coverage for the Alien softball leagues. And yeah, hopefully it all happens and all happens safely, and we figure it out.